Hey, everybody. See you in 90 seconds. Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Stevens here once again on another episode, just number 6. So we're just rolling them out here on Another Perspective on a Monday afternoon after kind of a tumultuous weekend around the world and kind of in this country as we're dealing with a couple of issues. Let's see if I can do this without these. Well, why not? Let's see. And you can hear, looks like the audio is all right. All right, so let's just keep going. There's a lot of things, a lot of crazy things we could talk about today, but this yesterday, in fact, because today's June 15th, June 14th was Flag Day. And to be honest with you, I liked flags as a kid. I don't know why. We don't know why we like certain things that we do as children, these impressions, these things that we're given, that we're born with, that we have to come to terms with, these journeys in life that whether we think they're our own or not, we're going down that road. And for some reason, I liked flags as a kid. And so for several years, Flag Day was kind of my favorite holiday. And when we moved out into the country, I think I was 9 or 10. I was absolutely 10 and 11 when we built the house. We didn't have a flagpole. And I kind of wanted a flagpole. And Dad and I talked about, good to see you guys coming on there, about building a flagpole. So on Flag Day, on June 14th, I could raise a flag. So that's kind of where I want to go today. I want to talk about, the flag. And it's most curious because over my 50 plus years, it has meant different things to me. The symbolism behind it has evolved, it has changed. Being naive and being a kid is one thing. But then, it kind of changes as you grow up, things begin to evolve. So let's see if I'm just doing. Yeah. So yesterday was Flag Day, and being where I live, that is not a thing. There's no parades. There's nothing like that to celebrate or to honor Old Glory or the flag itself. It just doesn't happen here in the community I am. But from the time I was 4, my grandparents were Canadian. 3 of the 4 were born in Canada, largely Alberta. So when they would come visit, and at this point in time, I was living in Pocatello, Idaho, they would bring their flags, and Grandpa would have a Canadian flag on his radio mast, on his radio antenna. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so Mom said he gave me the flag one time. So I needed a little pole to put the thing on so I could wave it. So they would bring me flags from Canada to go with my American flags. And Mom's writing at the bottom of the letter, I still like flags, 1970. And I was, all of 4 years old at the time. And there's me, with the American flag, just kind of proud and waving the thing. And this was all during the Vietnam War, something that I had no idea was going on. But nevertheless, I kind of liked flags, but it's been a journey. So we have Old Glory and the history of a flag because our flag changes. The flag has changed as the nation has changed, as it has grown, as it has evolved. that it has, as it has gone through wars and acquisitions, as blood has been shed and children born, all under this flag. And so there are certain definitions and certain statutes and certain, ways that has gone, but largely we notice the change not in the red and white, but in the stars in the field of blue. As the colonies became states and so forth and so on, then we ended up from the 48 state flag into the latter one. So how do flags relate to, say, patriotism, say nationalism, or just simply the pride of where you've come from, or you believe you've come from because that's the story you have been told as you were raised? Abraham Lincoln said, "I like to see a man proud of the place in which he lives. I like to see a man live so that so that his place will be proud of him. I like to see a man live so that his place will be proud of him." And you really couldn't ask for something higher. To be honorable in your actions, in your duties, to bring pride, to bring honor to where you're representing, to where you've come from, that they will throw a parade and a flag. And as the age I was, that those were astronauts. Those people, those pioneers, those adventurers, those explorers were the ones that came back home and were celebrated with parades. And that was me being a child of the 60s and 70s. And of course, always kind of interested in what's going on in the sky. But as time has gone on, we've seen the flag go through different, let's just say there are certain ideologies which have then wrapped themselves up inside a flag, trying to make either the patriotism, to be making our energies to associate their agenda with patriotism. And that has been something that I witnessed coming up through the 70s, but most likely the 80s, that patriotism was greatly associated with religion. And then that religion also adopted a party ideology, and one that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with. So the kid, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old who enjoyed waving the flag felt a little bit of angst growing up around that act of patriotism. It changed. And so something as grown-up religious who went to church every single Sunday, and it felt like that there I had to choose between a patriotism and then a belief system, that they could not remain separate. And that is a right, or an ideal, shall we say, that was enshrined inside the Constitution, the separation of church and state, that they shall not mix. And I felt that there was, no, I didn't think, I knew, I absolutely knew that there was something not right that was happening. So patriotism, so says Mark Twain, is the supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. And I believe in my 20s, that's what I was having trouble doing, separating the actions of those who were wrapping themselves in the flag and their version of patriotism from the government, because they were using that patriotism to co-opt one of the two-party system and then assert their agenda, their religious agenda, through the state mechanism of government. And that, in my estimation, was just straight up wrong. And so I liked the flag even less. And that's kind of unfortunate. All right. So Sidney J. Harris states the difference between patriotism and nationalism is that the patriot is proud of his country for what it does, and the nationalist is proud of his country no matter what it does. The first attitude creates a feeling of responsibility, but the second, a feeling of blind arrogance that leads to war. And with a little bit of hindsight from this last 20 plus years, you can see where one has been used to implement the other, where war begets patriotism, not for what the country is, but for what it does. And what agenda, when we begin to see kind of one giving way to the other, how do you then maintain an allegiance to one or the other? It becomes very, very different to separate. And we've had many instances where The Democrats say, I'll leave the country if this happens. And the Republicans probably with the same, if this happens, then, I'm not going to remain here at all. So and then Samuel Johnson, and this is going to lead into the next one. And I've seen this probably used more often than not, but not so clearly stated. Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. And the other quote I was kind of looking for was patriotism is the last tool of the despot. So it's your last cry of your population in the call to action to go down a road which largely in unstressful times, if you're not in an economic crisis, if you're not on the verge of war, these actions would not be taken because A, they're not moral, they're not legal, and you in your own common sense simply wouldn't go down that road. But when a nationalistic fever is whipped up time and time again, day after day, print of the paper, broadcast of the news, time after time, then you get wrapped up in this fever, and in that intellectualism, rationality, logic, these things that we use to keep ourselves out of trouble get us into trouble, just like that. All right, so there we are, patriotism coming out of the Nazism, and that is a nationalistic fever, and nobody doubts that at this point in time, where everybody went together for the collective good. But was it the collective good? Maybe for the country at the time, but what of those that surrounded them? How did you contain this fever that patriotism turned to nationalism, then turned to some kind of other ism that then cost millions of lives? And it's not like Germany or Rome or France or England were the only ones. This has been something that has literally gripped nation after nation after nation across nearly every single generation. And as I look back at the Time magazine of when I was born in 1966, in May of 66 for that, to be specific, because it was a specific issue. And I looked at that cover and I wondered to myself, how could parents bring a child into this day and age with this kind of turmoil? And it was kind of hard to believe that you would want to go ahead and create a family. But then in hindsight, it's all about parenting, not necessarily the world that you live in. The parenting is so key. So American were probably GIs or anti-war protesters that we won't fight another rich man's war. And this is not that far off from where we still are. And we'll get to that in a moment. Patriotism is when love of your own people comes first. Nationalism, when hate for people other than your own comes first. And that's when we have discord in society. That's when we have mobs. That's when we have rioting, because we've lost the ability to see your other citizens, to see your neighbors, to see people of another party, another color, another income class, to see other people, period, as something other than what they are. And that is your true brothers and sisters. And should be the easiest thing to do, is to see the divinity in each and every other person. But yet one of these isms, patriotism, nationalism, or even an aspect of individualism where only you are right and everyone else is wrong, ends up running through your head all day long because it's fed by an outside agenda. And that really becomes a challenge, is to control the information you choose to consume. That becomes task number one. All right, patriotism is your conviction that this country is superior to all others because you were born in it. Let that sink in. Patriotism is your conviction that this country is superior to all others because you were born in it. George Bernard Shaw, an Irish playwright. I mean, ridiculous, but truthful. And can that ideology, can that belief system then be used against you? And the answer is always yes. Always. It can be used against you, any belief. Any belief could be used against you. So be careful what one chooses to make their own. Teddy Roosevelt, patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any public official. And this is where we are. And this is the risk of, and also the benefit of, say, a two-party system. Three parties or four parties may actually be better because then we're more prone to compromise if there isn't a simple majority which then rules. And even when the Senate and other veto-proof legislation, you end up with the supermajority required a two-thirds majority to get some piece of legislation passed. Does not mean that if one of those fevers is running high, patriotism, nationalism, or the need to do something because some other event has happened, say a 9/11, a Pearl Harbor, a USS Maine, a Titanic, some event has happened that a two-thirds majority cannot be achieved, and rather easily, because no, when there's a herd all amongst you, saying yes becomes the hallmark of a very strong man with courage. And we talked about courage on the coffee break show this morning. Courage is something that we all find ourselves at times in our life a little bit short of. So that was Teddy Roosevelt. Um, Nothing really need more be said. And this took place as we were dealing with the 80s and what appeared to be the religious right wrapping themselves amongst God and the flag, making them nearly indistinguishable, at least with that particular agenda. And for those of us that would like to have seen or had bad experiences with one or the other, you didn't necessarily want to have those two issues, those two belief systems kind of come into view or come into, merging into one. So, growing up in a religious family and then by the time of 18, not choosing to want to go to church anymore because it didn't feel right, and also being brought up as a Republican, I'm like, that didn't feel right either at that point in time. And then this wrapping of the two, even solidified the move that the flag, that patriotism had been corrupted. And then we're back to protesting that George Bush, in a remarkable, clear moment of insight, of truthfulness. And it's amazing the things that you can almost get away with once you're out of office. And he said there were commercial interests that pushed for this war. And that was the reason for it. No more than that. They were commercial interests. And when you take a nation to war at the cost of the tax dollar for those commercial interests, who benefits? Does any of that trickle down to you and me? Is that even possible? Or is it just another bloodletting, another generation of soldiers that comes home or doesn't come home wounded? And it seems like both are true. We lose a generation of men, their ability to be dads, to father children. When every time we get deployed, this nation chooses to go to war, and largely for commercial interests. And that still kind of stinks to me. I mean, the whole point of banana republics through Central America, we sent our boys over there. We lost lives for commercial interests because there had grown an appetite for literally bananas, a tropical fruit. And that ideology, that idiom persists to the day of banana republics. All right. When asked by a lady, well, doctor, what have you got, a republic or a monarchy? A republic, if you can keep it, stated Benjamin Franklin. And that's the truth. A republic, if you can keep it. We believe and have been repeatedly told that we are a democracy, but that is not true. We've never been a democracy. And they knew, the founding fathers knew that we could never survive as a democracy. Because in democracies, like we see on social media now, what rules? The mob. The mob will rule. Someone can whip up a cause, real or not, and create formulate, gather a mob. And with that, the pitchforks, the knives, and the guns come out. And this is why the founding fathers instituted a republic, so the democracy can stay down below with the election of the representatives. But then once they got to DC, once they got to the point where laws had to be made, it had to be a republic. So responsibility, discernment, and getting out of the heat of the moment could take place. All right, Vicky, we are tired of losing our men to war and to PTSD. This is so true. The time will come. The time will come when we begin to gather our soldiers back, and we don't need a military, because if the lack of commercial need to go to war is taken away, then we can truly be a free nation once again without the ties to those kind of chains. Let's just put it at that. This nation will remain the land of the free only so long as it is the home of the brave. Can you see now where, when you see those injustices, not in mob rule, but to stay apart from the mob, because the mob exists for a reason, and it only exists to affect an agenda. That agenda is what needs to be examined. What would be on the news? What would be in the newspaper had the mob not been there? And as we said in one of the earlier shows, we need to check for opposition news feeds. We need to read what your opponent is doing, what is thinking, what they're planning, because we're all psychic. We all telegraph what we're thinking, what we're doing, or what we want to do long before we ever take that action. And the same is true in the public sphere. We'll throw out a test web, we'll throw out a lure, a trial balloon will go up. Those kind of things are happening all the time. And it's the subtlety in the news that we need to be aware of. And in doing that, staying anchored to what is true will allow you to be brave in the moment it happens. Another Jeffersonian. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. And this was stated in 1878, also on November 13th. And they had just gone through that war which founded this nation, and we'll get to that moment, that Declaration of Independence. We'll look through that in a moment. But that was the beginning. They had finally broken the bonds with England and said, enough. The time has come when we need different leadership. We need to follow in different steps. Back to Flag Day. Our flag does not fly because the wind moves it. It flies with the last breath of a soldier who died protecting it. We're all born in very special places and times, all of us with a purpose, a reason to be here, to stand up in times that are not easy. Because if life were easy, we wouldn't grow. If there were no pain, we wouldn't change. If it was easy, nothing would change. And we all know that change is what we need. But how do you go about doing that? How does that happen? And so something else that kind of fits into this, and this becomes the third part of what we're dealing with, and that's pride. Pride is a spiritual cancer that devours families, destroys marriages, divides churches, and corrupts government. And what brings about pride? And it's the simple unwillingness to admit that you might be wrong, that the course of action that one has taken, whether it's an individual, a city, a nation, might be wrong. And so whether it was right or wrong, pride keeps us in that groove, because a groove already once laid down is the easiest path to follow. And so we're unwilling to make that change because we're afraid to be wrong. And that is simply what pride does. It works for a while, but at some point it has to be let go of so that something greater, something more profound, something more enriching can come into your sphere. And once you open it up and let it in, there are just new vistas and new horizons and new potentials, new growth that can happen. And the one thing that keeps that from happening is simply pride. And that's why there was this proverb, 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. It's very clear and very simple that nationalism, patriotism all have a place, but there are three steps to life. Something is birthed, something is created. And then what that birth was sustained. We supported it. We defended it. We went to war for it. We bled for it. We died for it. And you do that only as long as it serves you. Because once it doesn't serve you, then the devotion to it is going to wane. The need to die for it. No, you're like, no, 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 no. It is not worth my life. So it becomes rather simple. And this is where our founding fathers were. They had realized that the pride of England, of France, of these European powers, we had been taken for granted as colonies. And there's still a lot of colonialism going on around the world. That has not ended. There is still a master and a servant. That exists in the banking and the monetary sphere. It exists within so many relationships. There is always one or the other, the master or the servant. Now, this text may get a little bit small, but I'm going to go back to the flag here before we wind this up. Old Glory stands for freedom and equality for all. The flag was carried by Union soldiers during the Civil War in a fight to abolish slavery. The flag of Lincoln was considered a great honor to be chosen to carry the flag in battle. The soldier was unarmed and knew they would most certainly die, as did most who fought, but understood that the fight, that their lives was worth the cost, an act of self-sacrifice. They believed in something greater than themselves. To them, the flag represented a symbol of freedom, of hope, of equality, and prosperity. To disrespect the flag, to kneel as to disrespect those people who fought and died to provide each and every one of us those rights we are afforded today. Old Glory knows not what color skin carries her, only that for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, to free from oppression. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We did not pass it on to our children in the bloodstream, meaning it's not genetic. It has to be earned to be kept. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States, where men were free. And that was President Ronald Reagan, the 40th president. And where this all began was the Declaration of Independence, where we could take down the Union Jack and then raise another flag and say, no, no longer will we be bound to this. So the Declaration of Independence rarely is it read. We're into the Bill of Rights, we're into the Constitution, but it began with a declaration, a controlling decision to declare that this is true. So when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impair them to separation, meaning it doesn't work for us any longer. It doesn't work for us, and the laws of nature and nature's God say that we can do this. We have the right to do this. because we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizations, and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed would dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing its object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. They knew they had reached the end. They knew they had reached the end to which the previous government could take them, that to remain in that allegiance with Britain, with London, that it would keep the colonies from becoming all they could be. And every people at every day should be able to say no, that you are inhibiting our freedom, our rights, our ability to be all we can be. So this is where we are. Where are we in this, with this nation so divided that we have an old guard, an old group of statesmen, and we've got a president now that may or may not, really depending on where you are, on this in this spectrum of patriotism. Have we gone down to the tool where we've got a despot in the White House, or is it patriotism? And this is just something I threw in there. This is the last slide, so we'll let it go here. Politicians haven't been tarred and feathered in a while, and it shows. And that is accountability. All of our actions, no matter how large or how small, are held accountable by someone, some power, somewhere. Husband to wife, wife to husband, children to parents, citizens to government, governments to citizens. It goes both directions, always. That is an immutable law of accountability, and something we have been born with a birth certificate in a nation, but that doesn't necessarily automatically require us to support it without questioning. And as I don't remember who it was that said earlier on, that we can support the nation, but not necessarily the politicians, the persons, the people in charge. That there is a greater good, a greater reason that each and every one of us is here today. A great purpose, a great service. All right, I'm going to pop over here. I've seen you going through, you've been raging on through, and I'm going to come back to full screen just because we're going to end that. And then Jillian, I'm trying something new today. I usually wear glasses. I put the contacts in because, I look better without glasses. So game theory tells us their behavior is based on your own, just as your behavior is being influenced by theirs. Quote of Brian Christian from Tom Griffiths. And it is. Everything is a game theory. Who is playing chess and who is reacting to your moves? You want to be a few steps ahead of your opponent. And if during the playing of that game, you can assess that they are reacting to you, you've won, because you can corner them just like cattle through a cattle chute and into the corral. If you can recognize that your opponent is behind and is reacting to your moves, you'll win. All right. Absolutely. Vicky, right. That's right. Um, term limits for statesmen. Agreed. Agreed. That's part of what I think is coming. And there's some other interesting people that I've run across. And I believe that we're going to end up with a new Washington, that neither of these two that are running, neither of them will likely be inaugurated next January. And we'll kind of leave it at that. Yes, Robin, we are playing chess. I do look great in glasses. Oh, they're, it honestly, this distance is either for readers or I'm like looking up through my progressive. So it's kind of a challenge. And I kind of like having to wear contacts. All right, guys. Love you all. Um, these are important issues. They really are. And we're all going to be tasked with some very powerful, powerful choices in the not too distant future, because it's like a balloon has been blown and blown and blown, and it's not going to take much of a stress, much of a sharp point to bring it all down. And once the balloon shatters, it doesn't come back together again. And whether that trigger is COVID, and I don't think so. I think it's just a stressor. I think the financial issue is probably going to be the larger one because we're so dependent on it. I mean, we can wear masks, we can go to work, those kind of things can be negotiated. I mean, if we truly understood what was going on with the virus, we'd take appropriate action and we'd just get on with it. Or we would just get the hydroxychloroquine and some Z-Pack and some zinc, and it would all just be over the counter and we could just put the virus thing behind it. But I really think the financial thing is going to be the big challenge. The other are these random black swans that just show up. Random black swans, whether it's an earthquake, something else. And one of the things we're going to be talking about is how to survive this because there are so many moving parts. How do you sink, or why do you sink versus how do you swim? And that's a topic we'll be coming up with a couple of times, and I'll probably have Vicky on. I see you over there, Vicky. We're working on a project for you all, so we'll get that up there, and there will be several. You're so right. And Risa, good to see you there. Happy with your new little addition to the family. Good to see that little guy around. All right, everybody. Black swans. Yeah, they're kind of for a guy who likes disaster movies. Black swans, honestly, are kind of exciting. They mix things up. They till the soil so you can see the worms, but then you're preparing the soil for the ultimate planting and the harvest to come. All right, everybody, take care. I'll see you on Wednesday for another look at another perspective. And yeah, that's when it'll be. All right, everybody, take care.